This is a massive question, so I'm really sorry, but
You've been doing this to me all the podcast, man.
Shut up, Joe.
What is the filibuster? You have 4 seconds.
we take a look at a bit of the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, so nitty-gritty is right. So when we say they, when we say...
What? Wait, we have breaking news literally just now.
Hello and welcome to American Friction, the weekly US politics podcast out every Friday. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
Who got rinsed by intern Jamie earlier, but I didn't. I'm Chris Jones. And joining us is Rolling Stone magazine politics reporter, also described as a salty Democrat by one of our beloved haters lately, Nikki McCann Ramirez. Hello, Nikki.
Hey, Salty.
Whoever said that. How are you?
Oh, well, yeah, they said that you can really taste the salt from your comments, and yeah, I like salt.
I love salt.
Yeah, I'm more of a savoury than
Sometimes
sweet
I
guy.
just eat salt.
Yeah, I've done that before.
It's very tasty.
Just a
Okay,
little lick on the finger.
that's too far. That's too far.
It's
No.
healthy for you.
Also,
good.
I honestly take more offense with being called a Democrat than I do with being called salty. I am salty.
Okay, fair enough.
Fair.
Yeah. Well, so we've actually got Nikki here, salty Jill Stein supporter, on the podcast. So anyway, Chris, it's time to ask us.
True.
It's time to ask us a silly question.
Rudy Giuliani, we're going to get to him later, but he's reduced to fighting over a refrigerator these days. So my question to you two is, if you had to fight to keep one household item, you can only keep one, what would it be?
Who wants to go first then?
Ooh.
So it's all white appliances essentially, like all your kitchen goods.
My dishwasher.
Yeah, dishwasher is good.
Hands down the dishwasher.
So basically, Chris is trying to bait me into saying air fryer.
Yeah,
But
you talk about it every day.
But that's kitchen appliance. But household appliance, it has to be washing machine. Because how else am I going to have clean clothes?
Wait, a kitchen
But
appliance
kitchen
can be a
appliance.
household appliance.
I know it can.
The
but
kitchen
if,
is within
but if
a
we're
house.
taking it more broadly, then it'd be ludicrous for anyone to say anything but washing machine. Unless
No,
you're going to start
dishwasher.
going down
you
to
could
the
just
river.
you wash it in the sink.
Oh, that would just be such a hassle. And Nikki,
It's
you
not
can...
that much of a hassle. You know what's even weirder? That Europeans don't use like dryers.
What? Yes, we do.
Well, like clothes dryers.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do.
use them.
Okay, mainland Europe, not you people. We've already established that England is fake.
Yeah, that's Brexit for you. Chris, what would you want to keep?
I'd probably go for oven.
Oven. Okay, cool.
Why did I
Oven.
say that so northern? But oven.
Oven. All right. Well, I'm going to say this
Cooks
has
your
been
food, innit?
It's quite a short question, this time. I don't know how much that revealed about any of our personalities, but yeah, you've got washing machine, dishwasher, and oven. So
Fairly sensible.
any psychologists who want to tell us what that means about us, write in and let us know what it means.
Please.
So on this show, anyway, we've got to talk about a few cabinet updates for you because, yeah, we annoyingly recorded last week before RFK Jr. got announced, so that's a whole thing. Anyway, yeah, we'll play a game of which TV show host has Trump given a job to now. Plus, we're going to discuss how Musk is getting Trump all wrong as he tries to be his BFF. And we're also going to get to discuss the return of policy announcements coming via social media posts, which isn't at all anxiety-inducing.
No, it's not. And Jarv and I sat down with Dr. Casey Burgat, assistant professor in legislative affairs and author of the upcoming book, We Hold These Truths, How to Spot the Myths That Are Holding America Back, for a conversation all about Trump's trifecta and the power that now brings him.
We did. What a trifecta. And we're a powerful trifecta right here, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Welcome back. You're listening to American Friction.
Cat!
We set up this podcast to follow the election campaign, as I'm sure a lot of you know, because you're very loyal and you've been listening for a very long time. That's over, but we're not going anywhere. You know, Wolf of Wall Street style, we're not going anywhere.
We're not at all. And you can find us pretty easily because we're now on Patreon. If you want to go and back us and keep us going, because we want to keep going.
We do.
Forever and ever and ever. So if you simply go to patreon.com/American Friction, there's a link in the show notes. You can get episodes ad-free, bonus content, and that will keep us going, which will be nice.
That's patreon.com/American Friction, patreon.com/American Friction. There's a link in the show notes to patreon.com/American Friction.
There's a link in the show notes.
Exactly. Nikki, let's do some quick cabinet updates. Oh,
We love a
no.
cabinet.
What's been happening now? RFK Jr., yeah. How outrageous an appointment is RFK Jr., which is a very loaded question, I know, because I expect you to say it's very. But come on, just go off on him and what's been going on since he's been appointed.
Yeah, so last week when we recorded, I think it was like a couple hours after we wrapped our recording, they announced that Kennedy is being appointed Secretary of Health and Human Services, which basically puts him in charge of all of the major health-related organizations in the American government.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, great. Love
is
that a
jacked.
guy... For legal reasons, I can't say why I think he's that jacked. Here's the deal. Kennedy, by trade, is an environmental lawyer. He is couching a lot of his, stated goals for this new position he might be taking up in being about, make America healthy again, making food safer, taking on big pharma, that kind of thing. But in reality, all that rhetoric centers around one really well-established goal that Kennedy has had for years and years and years now, which is his conspiracy theories about vaccines. Everything he says about taking on big pharma, removing chemicals from like food and medicine and water, fluoride in the water supply, dental disease for all. They all fundamentally center around like these conspiratorial beliefs that Kennedy holds. And we don't have to go super far in the past to see what happens when Kennedy gets involved in a nation's health policy. So in 2019, there was a measles outbreak in American Samoa. And what essentially happened was 2 little babies died after taking the measles vaccine. And that immediately created a panic within Samoa around people thinking that the vaccine was dangerous, that it was the vaccine itself that had caused these 2 babies to die. And there was sort of like a mass backlash. People stopped taking the vaccine. There was, I think, something around like 80 people who died as a result of this measles outbreak. And that doesn't even include the people who got measles and survived. What it later turned out, because, it takes time to do an autopsy and run an investigation, was that it wasn't the vaccine itself that had killed these 2 children. It was an improper mixing of the actual vaccine itself. It was like improperly prepared by staff at the hospital. While this was all happening, while there was this panic in Samoa about the vaccine, Kennedy's nonprofit, the Children's Defense Fund, got involved and started, making overtures to the Samoan government and publicly advocating against the use of the vaccine. They basically put out this like giant anti-vax campaign, and through all these combinations of factors, including RFK's organization's involvement, 80-something people died. This is the kind of person who is now going to be in charge of America's public health policy. And I don't think it's really possible to overstate how damaging this could be. We're already seeing a vast increase in the number of people who are skeptical of vaccines, who are outright refusing to vaccinate. We already see a lot of distrust, as we've discussed on this podcast, in American institutions, including scientific institutions, in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's pretty explicitly clear through a lot of Kennedy's public statements over the past couple years, especially throughout his campaign, that his plans revolve pretty directly around injecting his own personal beliefs into the healthcare system that affects the American population. So I think it's bad. I know there's a lot of jokes being made around, what do you call it? Like raw milk and that kind of thing. But Kennedy is going to serve as a pretty direct liaison to not just the conspiracies Republicans have about vaccinations, but all of the things they say about, medications like SSRIs who help people with really intense mental health struggles, about addiction, about, just general acts, how research around vaccines and the development of medications take place. It's going to be a really transformative administration if he gets confirmed. And I don't think the end result is that Americans are going to be healthier.
Very nice use of saying that he was injecting his opinion in there when he's against.
That's right. I totally did that
injections.
I noticed that.
Yeah,
that was really good.
I rated it. Another thing though there that you said that I do always find quite interesting when it comes to these conspiracy theories, and this is my conspiracy theory is that most of the time people are just too rubbish to carry off an actual conspiracy theory if something sort of big is going on, these deep state things. I don't believe that human beings are necessarily good enough at doing things in secret and carrying it out. But it's so interesting there that, as you say, the Samoan thing came from, there was human error, and that's tragic, and that's really sad that happened, and it's obviously awful. But that to me is the crux of so many of these conspiracy theories, that really it just boils down to humans are fallible and things go wrong, and then that just gets extrapolated in these really intensive ways, which I just find. Yeah, it's quite surely where they fall down. It's usually
just to give listeners a bit of a bigger picture about outside of vaccines, about what kinds of things Kennedy promotes. The Washington Post put together a really good list of 10 false claims Kennedy has spread, and I'm just gonna read the top lines really quickly. So obviously, false links between vaccines and autism. He called the COVID-19 vaccine the, quote, deadliest vaccine ever made. He promotes raw milk, stem cells, and other controversial or debunked medical treatments. These are all headlines from the Washington Post. Kennedy argues government employees have an interest in, quote, mass poisoning the American public. He claimed antidepressants are linked to mass shootings. He incorrectly suggested that AIDS may not have been caused by HIV. He also, at one point, claimed that vaccines were responsible for the creation of HIV, the Spanish flu, and Lyme disease. He said those were all diseases that were created because of vaccine research. He thinks children's gender and sexual identity is being impacted by chemicals in the water supply. He promoted things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as effective COVID-19 treatments. We know that they weren't. And he claimed that the COVID-19 vaccine was used to ethnically target everyone who wasn't an Ashkenazi Jew or a Chinese person. And he also thinks 5G can be used to control human behavior. So,
yeah.
Director of Health and Human Services, everyone.
And he
Maybe,
also,
if it gets confirmed.
He also loves eating massive McDonald's, even if he rallies against fast food too, as we've seen from photo evidence in the last few days. So a hypocrite to add to all of that. Right, let's get into another dodgy duo here.
Wait, we have breaking news literally just now.
Okay.
6 minutes ago.
Oh, not just now then.
Okay, tweet from Matt Gaetz. I had an excellent meeting with senators yesterday. I appreciate their thoughtful feedback and the incredible support of so many. While the momentum was strong, it is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition. There is no time to waste on needlessly protracted Washington scuffle. Thus, I will be withdrawing my name from consideration to serve as Attorney General. Trump's DOJ must be in place and ready on day one. I remain fully committed to see that Donald J. Trump is the most successful president in history. I will forever be honored that President Trump nominated me to lead the Department of Justice, and I'm certain he will save America. So,
how much of a surprise is this to you? And is there some ways that it could almost be expected? Because it seemed from the minute he was nominated, no one expected him to be able to pass through the Senate.
Yeah, I am not entirely surprised for a couple reasons. I think the timing of his resignation from Congress was really indicative of how this was going to go down. I think we talked about it in last week's episode. Gaetz resigned 2 days before the Ethics Committee was set to vote on the release of this report into allegations that he had a sexual relationship with a minor, paid her for sex, paid other women for sex. When the process of presidential confirmations happens, it's kind of typical that you'll maybe have one or two people which are sort of expected to tank. And I think it became and what that does is, especially in Trump's case, you have a lot of ideologues, a lot of people who are not necessarily qualified for the positions they're being nominated and appointed to. And the Senate is not going to sit there and fight you over each and every one of them. So you kind of have to distribute the crazies on like a scale. And you have some who are certain to pass, some who you're willing to fight for, and others who, if things go bad, you're willing to say, sorry, you need to duck out. I think Gaetz, right off the bat, from the moment Trump announced that he was the pick for attorney general, it was really clear that this was going to be an uphill battle, that even Republican senators who would have to vote on the confirmation weren't necessarily willing to put their vote behind. Some of the first people in the Senate who came out and called for the report to be made public were Republicans. And as we talked about last week, Republicans will control the Senate in the new Congress, but it's still a very narrow majority, only 4 votes. And there is still a pretty significant coalition of moderate Republicans who are from swing states where they have to be very careful about their own reelection prospects. And it only takes a handful of votes to defect from Republicans for the nomination to tank. So I think even though the ethics committee voted on Wednesday not to release the report, they delayed it, they lost jurisdiction over the investigation, it was pretty clear that Gaetz probably wasn't going to make it through.
Is there a little bit, I hate to suggest that Trump is some sort of master technician or maybe more smart than he actually is, but is there maybe some aspect of this that Matt Gaetz was quite useful for him to shift the Overton window of what is an acceptable cabinet pick? Because by using someone so outrageous, it has taken a bit of heat off of a lot of other picks, which we've mentioned are also pretty outrageous, but maybe not quite as egregiously so as Matt Gaetz. Yeah. So it's almost made everyone else seem a little bit more palatable. And then now he's been this kind of sacrificial lamb. It goes, oh, okay, cool. Senate, you get your little bit of power. And everyone else is kind of normal. We got rid of the crazy guy.
Yeah, 100%. I think it does. And that's why I think it's important from a journalistic perspective, if you're covering these people, not just to focus on the really egregious scandals, which, to be clear, they are egregious, but also the nitty-gritty about why these people are unqualified for the positions they're being appointed to or the actual things they plan to do. I also think the timing is kind of important here. The actual confirmation hearing and vote process has not started. Right now, it's just nominations. It's important to point out here that Matt Gaetz's situation was so bad that I think people in Trump's orbit were just like, we need to get him out of the picture and pick someone else, because if we keep dragging this on, not only is it going to get worse, it might affect other nominees, but it also might, kill the runway we have to vet other attorney general picks, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But since it's taking place so early in this nomination process, by the time they actually get around to hearings and voting, it might be a new person with a whole other set of issues that Democrats and moderate Republicans have the time to dissect and figure out their vote on. But yeah, I think it's pretty atypical for someone to withdraw their name from considerations like a week after being picked for the role.
On to someone else from the cabinet that we all know and we all dislike, I suppose. Elon Musk. He's been really quite weird, hasn't he, to be honest? And that's sounds a little bit rude, but I'm actually maybe been quite generous. He said he's proud to be first buddy on Twitter. Remember that website? People still go on it, apparently. Trump doesn't feel like someone who has or cares about having proper friends to me in any way, shape, or form. How uncomfortable have you found looking at Elon Musk's behavior around Trump? Because I hate to make myself sound a little bit old here, but it's cringe, isn't it?
It's very cringy. And if there's one thing that Trump doesn't like, it's people being cringy around him.
Yep.
If there's one thing he likes even less, it's feeling like he's being handled, feeling like he's being like chaperoned or manipulated. And we've already seen some reporting that Musk is having like blow up fights with members of Trump's inner circle because Musk has kind of taken on this attitude that he is like co-president. Trump detests the notion that the people around him feel they're entitled to his favor. He likes the people around him to be subservient.
Yeah.
To be, yes, sir, whatever you want, sir, whatever you need, sir. Over, the almost decade that Trump has been a major figure in politics, I think it's been pretty clearly established that the best way to succeed in Trump's circle, in Trump world, is to maintain a low profile, do what is asked of you, and maintain a public line of loyalty. Musk gave a ton of money to the campaign. He became a really prominent figure in the last couple of weeks. We talked about it. He was appearing at rallies. We talked about the $1 million giveaways. America PAC, this organization he started to pour money into elections, which he's already said he's gonna devote to work on the midterms in the next 2 years. The way I see it is Musk feels that he has bought himself influence over Trump. He feels that he has bought himself a seat at the table, a voice in the room, and an opinion. He feels he's bought himself an opinion. And as we mentioned when we first talked about the Doge situation, initially it did kind of feel like that department was a bit of a way to maybe put Musk a little bit to the side, give him this important sounding position where he can make recommendations, but didn't necessarily have any outright congressional authority to make the budget cuts that they're proposing. I think on Wednesday or Tuesday this week, we saw reporting that Marjorie Taylor Greene met with Vivek Ramaswamy to talk about establishing a subcommittee within the House Oversight Committee through which Greene would be chair and act as liaison between Doge, quote unquote, and Congress. So essentially, Musk and Ramaswamy could make their recommendations, pass those on to the Doge subcommittee in House Oversight, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene would be able to translate those into congressional action. Again, I do think, with the caveat that Marjorie Taylor Greene is a Trump sycophant and loyalist who will do whatever is asked of her. But again, it's not Congress approving the creation of a whole new department. It's the Trump administration, incoming administration, working to give Musk that power, but still maintaining some barriers to where he's not directly in charge of policy. And as we know, during Trump's first term, he didn't like Musk. He had that really famous tweet about him where he said that Elon Musk groveled like a dog. The relationship between the two of them has always been pretty tense. And, right now it's mutually beneficial because Musk helped Trump win a campaign. Trump is gonna Trump is not only giving Musk a position as the head of Doge, but we know through the relationships that Musk has with some of the nominees Trump is putting forward for certain positions, like Brendan Carr at the Federal Communications Commission, that Musk expects that this administration is going to hand him a lot of tax boons, a lot of favorable legislation. Musk expects for the investment he made in Trump's campaign to be paid back to him with interest, in the sense that he's going to make a lot of money off of the policies of this administration. So it behooves Elon Musk to not piss off Trump by acting like a weird little barnacle the next few months.
One final weird little barnacle to talk about then. We've got to do this really quickly. Nikki, who is Dr. Oz?
Oh my God, another member of the Trump TV cabinet.
Yeah.
So, for the Brits who are not aware, Dr. Oz is a former cardiothoracic surgeon. Big word, big hard word. Who basically became like a daytime TV star. He was first like a barnacle to Oprah,
Okay.
but his TV show was pretty infamous for just spewing a lot of medical misinformation to daytime TV watchers, like miracle weight loss cures, or sorry, miracle weight loss supplements and
Okay.
unheard of cures for cancer. Like this cancer can cure your supplement, or this, I can't talk today. Like this weird niche supplement that people don't want you to know about can cure your cancer. He claimed that like there was arsenic in apple juice. But essentially, big TV guy, he ran for the Senate in 2022 and lost to John Fetterman. And now he's just basically been rewarded for being a weirdo Republican who's very supportive of Trump with a position as the head of Medicare and Medicaid.
Cat.
Now that Republicans have officially won the House, we thought it would be a good time to take a look at a bit of the nitty-gritty, that's right, nitty-gritty of how Congress works, and whether it will be able to provide any checks and balances on Trump whilst his party has total control of it.
Go on, say nitty-gritty again.
Nitty-gritty.
Good job. And joining us to do that is Dr. Casey Burgat, Director of the Legislative Affairs Program at George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management. Hello, Casey.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's good to have you with us. Let's start with something fairly straightforward. We've talked on this podcast before about this triple threat, this trifecta that Trump now has. How rare actually is that for a new president to come in and have that kind of level of power, I guess?
In recent decades, it's increasingly rare, but also the last couple presidents have enjoyed it. Right? Trump had it in his first 2 years in 2016. Obama had it earlier, even with bigger majorities there too. So it's not the default status of our governmental setup, but it's definitely not a huge exception either.
How surprised were you really to see that Trump took all three?
It was definitely a possibility. We knew the Senate was going that way,
Yeah.
just given the map that Democrats were facing. The House was going to be a toss-up. No matter which party won, it wasn't going to be by a huge majority. So that left the presidency there, and we obviously knew that was going to be incredibly close. So it was a parlay to hit all three legs of that too, but also it was probably one of the more likely scenarios. So again, both answers can be true at the same time.
Let's go into the Senate a little bit more that you mentioned there. The GOP has flipped that to its majority. What are the major implications of that, and how does that change things along the political landscape, I guess?
We're seeing that right now, in that the Senate has a couple powers that aren't afforded to the House of Representatives. They have very specific ones. And one of the biggies there is advice and consent on nominations. And we think of this typically with Supreme Court justices, but as we're seeing right now, as Trump is starting to make his nominations, that it's also for a ton of cabinet level positions and then over 1,000 federal positions throughout the government. And so there's just a lot of appointment power there. And the Senate is the only one that can act on that, giving the president a thumbs up or a thumbs down on those people who he names to hopefully serve in those positions.
On the legislative side there that you mentioned, I actually had a bit of a question about, obviously, the Republicans are really throwing their toys out of the pram because of what Joe Biden is doing and pushing through what they're considering, I don't know, commies or whatever to sit on various courts. How unprecedented in the course of history is that? But also, I know talking about GOP hypocrisy seems to be our default at the moment, but is this new president of presidents doing this, was that set by Trump last time out? It doesn't seem to me like Biden's really doing anything different in his lame duck period to what Donald Trump did. And it was Donald Trump who did originally break that sort of mold.
Absolutely not. And this is something you can even look back to the very first presidents leaving town and looking for them to fill in lifetime appointments, right? Like you still have the power of the office. You want people to sit in there, especially if the party that's coming in believes the exact opposite as you do. That's where the value of these lifetime appointments come in. And we've seen presidents from literally John Adams until now make use of that lame duck period to make sure that their folks are in the bench, not only because they agree with what they're doing, but mostly to prevent that position from being filled for a lifetime of seat by someone with whom you just fundamentally disagree. So not a new precedent. Trump wasn't the first to do it. Biden is definitely not the first to do it.
With the Senate being in focus then as well, particularly because of Trump's cabinet picks, do you actually think there will be much resistance there? And realistically, how much can they push back with how many MAGA sycophants there are? Can a small group really do very much?
Yeah, so nitty gritty is right. So when we say they push back, we need to even be more specific than that, right? So we know Democrats are going to push back, but they don't simply have the majority to stop much of anything, especially given that confirming nominees take a simple majority. Republicans now have that, or they're about ready to have that. And so now we need to say who's they on the Republican side. Are there enough of them to break with the incoming president and say, for whatever reason, this person's not qualified. We don't like how fast this person is being jammed through the process. They're not going through their traditional background checks. Whatever reason they come up with, are there enough of them to join Democrats and basically put a break on the presidents, hoping to just rubber stamp these people through? So if there is a majority that are, for whatever reason, willing to break with the president, Democrats plus a few others, then they can stall effectively any nominee. But if a Republican united majority is in full support of whomever Donald Trump sends up to the Hill, then there's very little Democrats can do to stop it.
You mentioned the kind of due process there that they might flag up, but with trying to monitor that, is any of it actually anything more than, I suppose, subjective to people? Is any of it more than opinion? Are there actually things that Trump simply has to do? Or if the Senate goes, okay, well, we don't care, we don't mind Matt Gaetz, we don't mind it, so whatever. Is there anything official there that has to be fulfilled? Or if they just go along with it, they just go along with it?
Yeah, so the quick answer is if they just go along with it, or if they don't cause enough of a stink, then even what is required doesn't really matter, because they still gave him the vote to serve in the job anyway. Okay. But with that said, it's really position dependent, in that if you're taking over intelligence matters, you have to have some sort of background clearance to review that intelligence matter. A lot of these folks are required by statute to provide financial disclosures to make sure they're not stepping into an office for which there might be, financial conflicts of interest. And so there are these regulations. Background checks are just a common one that we used to not think about, because everyone had to do it, given that you're about ready to take over a huge agency. This is something that we should have done. But we're starting to see that when people don't enforce these things, then it doesn't really matter if they're required or not. That's how the guardrails work, and why when they're gone, and they're really hard to pull back.
Could we get into the weird position as well then, maybe, of having, I don't know, people in intelligence positions, but not with access to the level of intelligence you'd expect them to have? Could you have someone running an agency, but technically not having clearance to know everything that agency knows?
Yeah, we've seen this. We saw this in the late stages of the first Trump administration, where we had a lot of acting secretaries there who hadn't gone through this clearance process. And so we did have people that were technically not allowed to be in the room and see this information. And now we get into you want to start going down the weird holes now, that we have a literally convicted felon president who it's typically seen as like a red line in terms of providing access to certain sensitive material. That's obviously not going to be the case, because if he says he wants to have access to it, he can give himself access to it. So now what in the world are we talking about anymore?
How does discipline work in the Senate? Because it seems like Trump, obviously, he demands a lot of loyalty, and he seems like he's going to be quite bullish in all of his behavior. Yeah, it strikes me strange. You thought he'd be really fair and a great manager. But anyway, when it comes to like formally doing that, obviously over here in the UK we have whips and all that sort of thing, which a sort of semi-informal process. Is it quite similar over in Congress too?
Yeah, absolutely. And so he has his ardent defenders, and as much as the Senate Majority Leader and incoming John Thune is the new one taking over for Mitch McConnell, they want to have as effective as a working relationship as possible. And so what we don't know yet is how far Thune is willing to go to support the Trump agenda. How far is he going to push his own members? So he walks a fine line in then trying to support the president's agenda, knowing he was elected on that and to fulfill it in the Senate, but also being the leader of a pretty varied Republican Party within the Senate, where he has to take all those perspectives in, and some of whom, Murkowski, Collins, moderates within the Senate, whatever that means anymore, don't want to go as far as the president probably wants to go. So he has to represent both of those interests at the same time. Tough job.
Could you just give us a bit of a background, I guess, around Thune, because we've heard lots about loads of other people, but he's not someone that we've really spoken about on this podcast at all. So who is he, and is he someone who's going to be particularly kind of impressionable for Trump to get stuff done for him, essentially?
Trump says yes, or he's making the calculation that
Right.
yes. And so Thune is typically seen as just a good dude, a kind of a Mike Johnson, right? You never heard of Mike Johnson before, and that's probably the reason why he ultimately became speaker, is that he didn't have a lot of defectors out there. He didn't piss enough people off to lose enough votes to not become speaker. And Thune was kind of in that same model, where he has positioned himself for a long time sitting right by Mitch McConnell as kind of being the supportive of the McConnell strategy without being the ruthless tactician that is Mitch McConnell. And so that's a good way for Republicans to try to make sure that they get everything done in a really tight Senate, but also not maybe lose those moderates that were not willing to go as far as McConnell and definitely Trump wanted them to go in terms of just outright power grabs.
That notion of how tight the Senate is there something about that power dynamic as well? It seems to me, the more that we talk about US politics, as we do a lot on this podcast, but I felt like when it came to November, you'd go, okay, well, there was the election, and then you have a period where it feels like elections stop, and you do get that in the UK, but you don't get that feeling in the US. It seems like everyone's still pitching for the next time they vote. So is that one thing that maybe the Senate Majority Leader does hold over Trump, is that if he were to say lose his job, if John Thune were to lose his job, it's mutually damaging. And that's something where they have to make themselves, not show that there's chaos in the caucus and all that sort of thing. Like that ridiculous situation when they just couldn't get a new House Majority Leader and it just ended up making Republicans look terrible. Is that something they're sort of playing off on?
Jav, you just nailed a lot of what happens in behind party meetings, and that the whole goal, and Nancy Pelosi, will say what you want about her, she was the best at this in history of making sure that the disagreements between the parties, and there's an infinite amount of them, that they don't reach the public sphere, right? That we present a united front, not only because it's better in negotiations with the president, but it's especially good for electoral politics. That we want voters to know what Democrats believe, and we want them to have a contrast with what Republicans believe. And the more we muddy the waters with ourselves, the less that contrast is beneficial. So you're right in that the whole goal is to keep a united front. If there are disagreements, take them behind closed doors, try to hammer them out there. And that the campaigns absolutely never stop, that voters are constantly paying attention. And probably this is one of the biggest disconnects I think there is between official DC and the rest of the country, is that DC thinks voters are paying attention all of the time. And that if they just mess up one time, or if they take a tough vote, then they're going to be punished immediately. And we learn over and over. In fact, the leaders don't know, or the officials don't learn this, but they're not paying attention much at all. They're looking for they're paying attention to the campaign season, these top of line issues. Where do they stand? And so I think there's a lot more wiggle room within individual politicians to make tough choices and not fear the election as much as they think they do, even though it's always coming.
With disagreements, not wanting to make them too public, I suppose, then this whole notion of Trump apparently wanting to try and do recess appointments where he'd recess Congress and then get them through in that sort of way. I mean, could you explain that to me a little bit and give your thoughts on it? But also, kind of paradoxically, would that almost be better for the Senate as well as being better for Trump? Because then they don't have to rubber stamp these horrible people. And whereas if they do have to go through the clearance, then the responsibility is on their hands. Whereas you'd think that they'd go, hey, we want the power, we want the chance to do this. But actually, might some of them privately be going, it'd be great if Trump just whizzes all these people through and we don't have to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, so a lot there. So how much time do we have? But with reset, that's true. Your sentiment there too, of like the Senate taking comfort and kind of wanting the president to take over the process of appointments takes them out of making a tough choice, whether it's voting down someone that shares a Republican name, or pissing off the president, who obviously is more than willing to attack them even if they're the member of the party, right? And so they remove themselves for that process. Your instinct is correct, and it doesn't just stop at nominations. This is what we've seen with legislating too, where the Senate, the House even, doesn't want to take very tough votes because there's not a ton of win there. So they let the president legislate, be incredibly aggressive through executive orders or bureaucratic changes, and they kind of remove themselves from the process, which is horrible institutionally, right? We talk about the beauties of checks and balances, and the minute you pull yourself back, there's always, and it's usually always a president more than willing to fill that power void. And that's what we're seeing right now with the talk of recess appointments. So do you appreciate that coming around? Back to the call back to recess appointments, where they are made in a recess. It was written for a time when the Senate was more often not in session than they were in session, right? 1789, it was tough to get to DC. They were often just back home all the time. And so they allowed the president to make appointments and fill government jobs to make sure that the government continued, even if the Senate was back home chopping wood, right? It's obviously not that case now. It's 2024. They meet all of the time. And so he's kind of dusting off this old thing that's still in the Constitution and making it even more aggressive for cabinet level positions, basically telling the Senate, you guys go leave so I can get what I want. Now it's going to be up to the Senate to basically perform that check and say, no, that's not how the process is supposed to work. We need to vet these people. The American people deserve to know who are serving in these positions, to say nothing of that we're senators, and this is a job that you can't tell us to do.
Just to take a step kind of back a little bit, and taking a look at laws and the way that they're passed through, because I think one of the issues with this trifecta or this triple threat, whatever you want to call it, is that perhaps people think that Trump now has too much power and it's too easy for him to pass laws through Congress. So could you talk us through that process a little bit? Because I think one of your colleagues, Todd Bell, said that the level of opportunity that Donald Trump has right now is very high. How true is that?
It depends on what we're talking about. Are we talking about policy or are we talking about people? Because the thresholds for doing those things are two different things. With people, as we see with appointments, it takes a simple majority, right? But on policy, the House, it requires a simple majority, and he has a simple majority there. But even we saw last Congress where Republicans don't always agree with Republicans. In fact, the Republicans are the ones that kicked out their own speaker, who was a Republican. So saying that they just have the numbers there doesn't really give you the full picture of how much united fronts there are to pass policies. And that's just the House. You go over to the Senate, where it takes basically 60 votes to have a passage of any law anyway. And Republicans, even though they have a majority, they only have 53 seats. That's 7 short of the required 60 to get out of the filibuster and move on to an up or down vote in the Senate. So policy making is going to be incredibly difficult. We're not unlikely to see huge controversial bills pass in the way that we think we should when we see a Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican president. There's a lot more built-in checks, particularly on the Senate side.
A stupid question here. The filibuster.
Nice.
What's the deal with the filibuster? I suppose is the big question I'd like to throw up to you. And also, it does seem that basically everyone hates it when they're in power, but then when they're out of power, they think,
bingo,
fuck this, we're going to use it.
Yeah, or we need it, right? Yeah. Like, I'm glad it exists when it's there because this is the only thing stopping us from whatever this guy I hate and his party wants to do to us. So the filibuster in its most simple form in the Senate, they can talk for as long as they want. Right. And for a long time, the Senate just met and they were able to talk and they just let people bloviate until they fall over. And then after that, you move on to the vote. So the biggest misnomer out there is that the vote threshold it takes to pass a bill in the Senate. It is a simple majority. You get 51 senators, you can pass whatever you want. The hard part and where the filibuster comes in is making senators stop from talking. Right. And the only way you do that is invoke cloture. The filibuster is what we see in our movies or our mind's eye, where we see a principled lawmaker go to the floor and basically just stand up for his rights to talk forever and ever and ever, and then the Senate never moves on to the actual vote. That's the filibuster. But there's a mechanism within the Senate rules where you can make those senators stop talking. It's called cloture. Cloture your mouth and stop talking. And to invoke cloture, stop debate, stop them from talking, it takes 60 votes. So while it only takes 51 to pass a vote, you have to get to that vote at all. You need 60 people to agree that we should remove their right as senators to stop talking and let's actually do this thing. So in effect, it raises the threshold to pass anything in the Senate to 60. And given that no party, and as recently as Obama in 2008 hasn't had 60 senators of the same party, then you're going to need some compromise in there, at least some opposite party votes to help you do it. So it's a big deal. It stops things from passing, and people hate it when they want to get things done but don't have 60 votes, and they love it when they're in the minority because, again, it stops them from getting what they want.
Politics. It's rough, isn't it?
Numbers game.
Yeah,
Chris.
who's
You
going to
gotta
get
get your head
podcast
around
about
it.
it? Coming back to today and what we've seen happening. Actually, no, to go back to 2016 first, Trump's first 100 days was absolute chaos. He said he was going to get loads done, and he didn't get anything done, really. Do you think, from what we've seen since the election count and since we've seen him win the triple threat, from what we've seen, do you think that there's scope for him to get more done that he's promised in his first 100 days this time? Or do you think that there is perhaps too much expectation, that he's perhaps promised too much to be able to get anything done in this first 100 days this time?
I think both are true, and that it's going to be less chaotic, more effective first 100 days, and that he completely overpromised, and he's going to frustrate people with the amount of, he said, is going to get done and the speed to which it's going to, like solving Ukraine on day one. I don't know how that happens, so we'll see. But at the same time, there's some critical differences, very simple differences between Trump round one and Trump round two that will make him more effective. Number one is that he's had the job before. Right? Like walking into any new job, you got to meet the people, know the process. He's done that. He may not have invested, but at least some of his people did. Right? The second critical difference is that they didn't have a plan in 2016. They were as shocked as anybody that they actually won. And to run a transition, fill all these thousands of positions, to say nothing of pass something, be ready to do it, is very different. And then third, the people who are sticking around mean it. Right? Like the ones who are still left and willing to serve in these administrations, they have kind of waited and bided their time in DC, whether at think tanks or supportive groups. And now they're ready to hit the ground running with that plan that was not there in the first place. So they're going to be more effective. They're going to be more aggressive. That doesn't mean they're going to be given carte blanche by the Republican Party, but make no mistake, this is an administration that has waited 4 years to get back into power.
Just finally, when it comes to the checks and balances we've discussed there, and there's things like the filibuster and all these sort of things, but do you think that this system really is? I mean, this is a massive question, so I'm really sorry, but
you've been doing this to me all
I know.
podcast, man.
Shut up, John.
What is the filibuster? You have 4 seconds.
But is this showing that maybe the system just isn't as robust as it needs to be? It seems really strange to me that I look over in the US and there are so many different layers, but at the end of the day, they can also all just get completely bypassed at some point as well. And if you had to really change some things when it came to Congress, there are a couple of changes you can make that you think would make things a little bit better. What would you go for? What would you do?
Yeah, it's a really great question about the sentiment. And this is where checks and balances and all these institutional guardrails, right? They're awesome. And when they look really good on paper, it's sweet. You can't design a better system. The problem is that they have to be carried out by actual people. Right. And so when you can write the best, most perfect plan of how to do something, but if no one's there to carry it out effectively, then it doesn't matter if you wrote anything at all. Right. Like it's just picking up like a perfect board game. But if you throw the instruction manual away, then you're just going to have chaos in trying to play the game. And ultimately, you're going to call win. Right. So it's kind of the same way that we need actual people to understand where they sit in the system, respect it, and then defend it, even and especially when it's members of your own party trying to overtake those things. And that's tough in this political age when everything moves fast and everyone's polarized, right? And so when we talk about changes that can be made, this is where it's really tough because everyone wants the 1, 2, 3, the silver bullet fixes. And the hard part is just simply not that. We have internal things that we can do to make people commit to the jobs of legislators and checks and balances. There's external things like with campaigns and campaign finance. There's a lot of media stuff that we can do about not incentivizing the giving camera clicks to everyone that is the loudest and most extreme in the room. And so it's a yes. All of the answers above are really important to affect those incentive structures from what to when you get inside. And that's where I spend all my time, is trying to change the incentive structures where you get rewarded for compromising rather than getting kicked out of your party, like a Liz Cheney or an Adam Kinzinger, right? It's no accident that these are the folks that have been kicked out of these types of parties, literally thrown out of the Republican Party in Mitt Romney's case for being, not supportive enough. And so we got to change those incentive structures. And there's just simply not one good solution. There's infinite number of that will make small marginal differences, and we need to pursue them all.
Just a sidebar question on that, I suppose. I'm always amazed by C-SPAN and just how much it covers absolutely everything. It just seems like a really amazing system that you have over in the US that we don't really have anything quite comparable to here in the UK. But is there actually a bit of an issue at the moment in terms of how the media construes that amount of coverage. And there's a really weird sort of position that we're in, that maybe too much scrutiny of Congress is causing problems as well. Because as you said, people are looking for those sound bites, and people are scared about becoming the sound bites as well. And we need Congress to be able to have massive discussions and have massive amount of nuance in those discussions. But the people looking on can see absolutely everything, and they're never going to show everyone absolutely everything, and no one's going to watch it all, but you can take all the little snippets out. So is there a weird kind of paradox there that too much scrutiny is almost, it's like having no scrutiny at the same time?
Yeah, or it incentivizes the wrong types of scrutiny, right?
Yeah.
And so with C-SPAN, members love it because the camera has to be on them. And so this is where it always comes to the alternatives, that there's no perfect alternatives to these things. So your question basically is, do we publicize and televise the proceedings of our Congress to a people for whom they're representing? And to me, that seems to be a fundamental yes, right?
Yeah.
Because the alternative of that is that you close it off. People's worst instincts are then confirmed, like they're literally negotiating behind closed doors. We have no idea who's voting for what and what they're saying, what they believe, which allows them to go back to whatever audience they are and say, yeah, I agree with you, because you have no alternative to prove them wrong. But at the same time, the incentive is there to make sure you're speaking to that audience, a polarized audience, the ones that wants to hear you be tough on the other side, to own the libs, to shut the conservatives down, right? And so it's just this non-perfect answer, but there's a lot of arguments out there from a lot of academics who say that the pro-transparency movement went too far, that it opened us up a Pandora's box of, it wasn't good when we didn't know what the hell was going on in Congress, but also it did flip on so many cameras that, of course, they're going to pay attention to them. Their jobs are reliant on them. So is there a fine middle ground? Maybe, but we haven't found it yet, which leads us to choose from one or the other, and count me on the side that I want to know what's going on in there.
Even if it means we've got Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Oh, don't bring her up again.
Dang, we almost got through it without her, without mention. Couldn't do it.
God damn it. You threw me there. You've already thrown me.
Sorry.
But Casey, thanks so much for your time. Before you go, you've got a book coming out. What's it called? When's it out? What's it about?
Yeah, thank you. It's called We Hold These Truths, but podcasts are tough for this. The truths are in quotes there because it's all about political myths, the things that we think are true in our politics and often weaponized against us to keep people in power, to keep the status quo remaining. So I think it's about time, just to the last question here, that there are no simple answers here. So it's time to just break down the hard ones. And so laying out all these political myths, making sure we think about politics the right way, then we can start having the real conversations of what to do about it, rather than fighting about the wrong things over and over and over, because we know we're good at that. Coming out in February next year. Go get it. Excellent.
Listeners, we will put a link in the show notes to that. Casey, thanks so much for your time.
Awesome. Appreciate it, you guys.
Cat.
It's a very busy week this week, so to round up some more news, more news for everyone who's listening in, Nikki, we have re-entered the era of Trump dictating policy by social media post. As we all know, he used to just tweet all the time and just say shit he was going to do. He basically confirmed that he would be deporting people using the military by replying to a random post from a few days earlier, which said about doing this, and he just replied, "True." It's quite a scary prospect that he intends to do this, for one thing, but two, is this indicative, and have people almost forgotten just how scattergun this guy is when it comes to saying what he's going to do, doing what he's going to do? He's just happy to he wants to sit on his mobile phone and he will say huge, life-changing things for massive numbers of people just in reply to his random friends' tweets.
Yeah, it's been 4 years, and I think in those 4 years, the coverage of Trump's social media activity has fundamentally changed, largely because, as you said, he was not president for the last 4 years. He was just a guy tweeting, and of course, his tweets did influence policy. I think the top of mind example is him telling Republicans to kill the border bill because it would be good for Democrats. He's still been influential, but from a distance. I think the thing that people need to understand about the difference between Trump's legislation by tweeting in his first term and in this term we're about to start is that during his first term, Trump was still surrounded by a lot of longtime DC establishment Republicans who got into the administration. Some of them because Trump loyalists from the get-go, others because the Trump administration wasn't entirely prepared to staff a government and picked established figures who they thought would help usher in Trump's agenda. And at many turns, a lot of the more insane things that Trump tweeted out being like, I'm going to do this, was ultimately blocked by people in his administration who were like, no, that's not legal. You can't do that. That's undemocratic, blah, blah, blah. The people like John Kelly, who now call him an authoritarian. That's not the case this time around. The people Trump is picking are being picked for a lot of reasons, but primarily because they are loyal to him, because they are just as willing to implement the really draconian policy proposals that he's outlined without questioning whether they're necessarily constitutional or by finding a way to make them constitutional. For example, you have Stephen Miller talking about using the Alien Enemies Act, a law from the 1800s, to justify mass deportations. It's a law that's only supposed to be implemented against countries the United States is at war with, but they're exploring legal ways to interpret that legislation in order to justify mass deportations. Those kinds of people are the people who are now going to be staffing Trump's cabinet and the federal agencies in his administration. So I think what's going to happen is that in the next 4 years, when Trump tweets something absurd, the amount of resistance from DC Republicans and Republicans within the administration is going to be a lot less powerful.
Chris, we've looked a little bit at public opinion on immigration and that sort of thing before, but just to take us up to date, there's been a little bit more research around this. What is the actual public opinion on what Trump is suggesting he's going to do?
Well, the Public Religion Research Institute did some research with Brookings Institute on the use of military encampments, basically, for immigrants and use of deportations. And it found that overall 47% of Americans that participated in that research approve of the use of military encampments when it comes to deportations. The split of that, though, is Republicans 79% backed the idea, Democrats 22%, but independents was 47%, which was, I thought, quite a lot. Quite a conservative idea that independents are essentially agreeing with. But there's more evidence as well of how much more conservative the US is becoming when it comes to immigration policy. According to Marquette Law School, support for deportations, especially for those deemed to be in the US illegally, is at 60% compared to 39%. But what's really interesting is what they did is they changed the wording slightly in a next question in their polling, which essentially said that if these immigrants were in the US but had jobs and no criminal record, that splits. So it's only 39% compared to the previous 60% would support deportation in that situation. So it's really interesting, and it's quite confusing, and it's quite hard to get an actual overall picture of how Americans are feeling about it.
Yeah, I suppose it also shows how well Trump has been able to get through his message, which we've debunked before, essentially his suggestion that a lot of the immigrants in the country have criminal records to an excessive number, which we know to not be true. But clearly, when you look at how Republicans feel about it, as you've said there, it's sort of when they believe that not to be true, they have less of a problem with these people. But then clearly they do believe it to be true on the whole when they're initially asked. So quite a depressing thing to look at there. Nikki's mentioned a lot of sycophants to Trump in this show. You mentioned Rudy Giuliani a little bit up top, but let's just give him another mention though. He's having a terrible time, isn't he?
Oh, he's been having a bad time for quite a while, isn't he?
And we don't feel bad for him.
Nah, you said off mic that you feel a little bit bad for him.
Did I?
Yeah, that's what I heard.
No recording. It's not real.
Yeah, he's not having a good time
No.
in a minute. As we say, he's battling to keep his refrigerator. He's already lost his Mercedes and a few watches, which is devastating. But essentially, this is all around this $148 million lawsuit that he lost for essentially defaming a mother and daughter over election counting in 2020 in Georgia. Oh, thanks, Nikki. Yeah, I was getting there.
It was in Georgia.
Oh, was it?
Yep.
Oh, Georgia. In America.
Where was it, Nikki?
Chris, it was Georgia.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nikki. So this was in Georgia. Thanks, Nikki. He's lost an appeal for that already. And there's a process ongoing where basically his valuable assets are getting counted up and dished out. And this is where the refrigerator comes in. I don't know why I've said it like that, but I have. And he might lose it.
Okay.
He might not, but he probably will. There is another trial coming up, though, and this is basically to enforce the delay that he has made to paying back this mother and daughter duo, the amount of money. That's around January 16th, but he's trying to delay that. Can you guess why or what date he's trying to delay that until?
Until January 23rd?
That's right.
Oh, because he wants Trump to be there to help him out.
Essentially,
To pardon him.
He wants Trump to throw it out and save his ass.
Yeah. And his assets.
And his assets. Save his assets.
Yeah.
Nice job.
Nice.
But essentially, he's trying to delay it because he says officially he wants to be at the inauguration. That's the reason he's given.
Okay.
But the real reason many have suspected is that he wants Trump to save him.
On that note, though, Nikki, and Trump and Rudy Giuliani's relationship, we can just take the piss and laugh at Rudy Giuliani as a not very nice person who's maybe getting a bit of his comeuppance here. But does this also, why it's worth paying some attention to, show us just how happy Trump is to kind of discard people once he sees them as useless to him? And Rudy Giuliani, it feels to me, couldn't be more useless to Donald Trump at this point. So the notion that Trump is going to wade in and really help him out doesn't seem particularly likely. He doesn't mind just cutting people out of his orbit, does he?
Yeah, that's been the case pretty much his entire presidency, his entire political career. And even before that, as a reality TV host, what was his catchphrase? You're fired. I don't think Trump really forms attachments outside of like transactional relationships. And I mean, Rudy Giuliani, if you know a little bit about his history, his real motivation was hatred for Joe Biden. Because I think Joe Biden once read him for filth in a presidential debate. And so Rudy Giuliani ran for president in like 2007. It wasn't a debate, but Joe Biden said of Giuliani, he is, quote, probably the most underqualified man since George Bush to seek the presidency. There's only 3 things he needs to make a sentence: a noun, a verb, and 9/11. Yeah. Rudy Giuliani never forgave Joe Biden for that quote. And one of the reasons he got so involved with Trump was, his antipathy to like Obama and Biden, and then in the re-election campaign, his antipathy toward Biden again. Now he's just embroiled in legal scandals. He's lost his law license. He can't really do anything useful other than spread conspiracies, and he's so toxic at this point that not even Trump, the people in Trump's orbit, don't want him there.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of American Friction. Nikki, thank you very much.
Hello, thank you so much, and thank you, listeners.
And Chris,
thank you, and thank you, Jov.
And thank you. I didn't even.
Oh,
get
and thank you, Jov.
Yeah, thank you. Thank me, everyone. I'm going to take a little pause there. Wherever you listen to the podcast, just say a big thank you.
Fuck you.
Thank you very much, guys, and all of you out there listening, we really, really do appreciate it massively, but we've got a couple of things to ask you where you could support us a little bit more. So one of them, we have a Patreon now where you can get the episodes ad-free, you can get extra content, there's even merch, there's all sorts of stuff there. So if you search American Friction Podcast Patreon or go to patreon.com/American Friction, you can find out how you can support us directly there from £3 per month. We'd really appreciate it, and yeah, we really need it. It'll keep the show on the road. It's something that we very much need. But aside from that, we understand that not everyone can back us financially, but what you can do, if you can go down into the app, wherever you're listening to, and follow, subscribe, comment, whatever your app says it is to do. But yeah, just say nice stuff about us and make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can hear it every single time it comes out. You've been listening to American Friction. We'll see you next week.
Cat!